Now that we have a space station in orbit of Minmus, and we've got it outfitted with fuel and electricity, a science laboratory, a cupola for the command center, a living space in the form of the doohickey that we just flew up there, and we have this handy little tiny spaceship docked to it. It's time to finally put the station to good use. The whole point of Yoda Station was so we could take the little runabout here down to the surface of Minmus, do some science, fly back up to the station, process that science in the laboratory, and then transmit it back to planet Kerbin. And so that's exactly what we're finally going to do. So here we have Mr. Generic Kerman, and that's I'm not just saying that he is a Kerman who is generic. I'm saying his first name is literally generic. So Mr. Generic Kerman is leaving the living space we just delivered. He's had some food, he's rested, he has prepared himself for this mission, and now he is on board. I don't know what the actual name of this little spaceship is. Oh, there's our gas tank. It hasn't collided, hasn't crashed into Minmus yet. Yeah, I'm calling this ship here the Runabout, but I don't know if I actually made that the official name of it in the game. I forget what I named it in the game. But we have disconnected now from Yoda Station, and we're going to back away first, pausing only to look at how cool it looks when you have a ship connecting to or floating away from a space station. I love the visuals in this game. I love this shot. It's just beautiful. This is space nerd porn right here, I'm telling you. I actually think, oh, here I am. I don't usually show you guys this part, the plotting, the courses and everything in the YouTube videos, because I think it's a little boring to look at me plotting courses and stuff, but I wanted to show, just give you guys an indication of what goes on behind the scenes to make these incredible feats of navigation and space exploration possible. But yeah, so here we have the runabout descending on the planes. So at this point in the game's development, Minmus has a variety of biomes that, and you can do all of the science experiments you can do on each individual biome. And you can get 100% science, and you can literally get 100% science for doing all these experiments on the mountain, and then pop over to the flats and do the same experiments again, but get all the science over again because it's a different biome. So I've already done some science on Minmus, but I haven't done any science on the flats. So that's what this excursion is going to do. We're going to fly down here. We're going to land on the flats. And there's like 3 different kinds of flats that are each a different biome. But today we're landing on the lesser flats, and we're going to do, you know, the runabout here has everything. It's got the goo, it's got the Science Junior 9000 dealie, it's got a thermometer, it's got everything. So we can do all the science in all the different places on Minmus. And since we're not going to fly them all the way back to Kerbin, probably in order to get 100%, we'll have to come back here and do the same experiments like a second time or something. But that's why we have the science lab up on the station. So we can fly up there, process the science and get more of it. But also, the science lab will let us reset these experimental modules so we can fly back down here and do it again. So I really like that. I like the functionality of the science lab. Obviously, Minmus would be easy enough to just fly back home. Oops! My landings are never quite perfect. It'd be easy enough to just fly back to Kerbin and get 100% science, but this is kind of a prototype for building this sort of a science lab in orbit around Jewel or something, where it's much harder to fly there, do science, and fly all the way back home again. I think the runabout is actually kind of ugly. because of the very tippy top of the runabout has that funky inverted um, shape. So and you can see it's at the very top. Everything is getting narrower and narrower. From the bottom to the top, everything tends to be getting narrower and narrower. And suddenly, that last piece there makes it suddenly get wider. And it looks weird. But the docking ports that I wanted to use, the medium-sized docking ports that I wanted to use, are just wider than the very tippy top of that module was designed for. So I had to use that adapter. There's a couple of different ways I could have done it, but this I think makes for the strongest actual physical connection. And obviously when it's docked, I want it to have a good solid connection. So anyway, it's kind of goofy looking. A lot of the spaceships and things I build in Kerbal are goofy looking. I tend to put function over form. I tend to build things that work very well, but are ugly. And this, I think the runabout is a perfect example of that. In a weird way, a lot of the things in outer space and space exploration are that way, though. When you look at things like the lunar module or just, gigantic big old rockets, they're not necessarily attractive from an aesthetically pleasing, artistic standpoint. They're attractive because of what they do. They fly in space. The lunar module is pretty clunky, pretty gangly. It's pretty ugly looking, but it landed on the frickin' moon, and so it's beautiful. You know what I mean? It's beautiful because of what it does, not because and because of what it's accomplished, not because of just what it looks like. Anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense, but here we are. Here is generic Kerman. He's gotten outside of the runabout, and he's planting a flag, but he's also taking soil samples and doing an EVA and all that jazz. And this is another reason to have a manned space station with a manned runabout on board, is because there is some science that you can't do with probes. There's the soil samples and the situation report or whatever. You have to have a Kerbal out there to do it. So if I fly to Jewel and I want to land on Lathe or Paul or whatever, and if I want to get 100% science, and if you're going to fly all the way to Jewel and land on these planets out there, you might as well go for 100% science. Why go to all that trouble and then half-butt it, So the idea would be that we would have Kerbals out there landing and doing all the soil samples and everything. And so why not 100% it here on Minmus too? So there we go. So anyway, he's gotten out, he's done his thing, and now he's trying desperately to get back in the ship. And apparently he hit his head and bounced off it the first time. The Kerbals are sturdy. These are the kind of people who can fly at a door, hit their head, fall back down on the ground, and get right back up again, and still, despite a possible concussion, they can still pilot their spaceship. So you've got to have a lot of respect for generic Kerman. Generic Kerman, you may be generic in name, but not in function, sir. I don't know if that made any sense. It doesn't need to. I put too many lights on these things. I mean, when the runabout was getting close to the ground on the landing, it's almost blinding how much light is going down there. In designs of future landers, I may only use 1 or 2 lights instead of 4. Because you really don't need, you don't need to be looking down to see how close you are to the ground and be blinded by the reflection of the lights that you're shooting down there. But anyway, so we have landed on the flats. We've done all the science, and now we are just flying back to the space station. Now, one of the advantages of having the space station in orbit is look at how small this gas tank is, and we've only used, what, 1/4 of it? Not even a fourth, maybe a fifth of this gas tank. Flying from the station, landing on the moon, on Minmus, which is Aiden, and then flying back up to the space station uses very little fuel. And that's an that would be a big advantage if we fly all the way to, say, Jewel. Or, when I'm saying Jewel, but it could be Duna, it could be Moho. I've already done Drez, so I don't know that I need to go back there at this time. Oh, look at that. Minmus is a beautiful planet. I love Minmus. You know, so much of outer space is just gray. And so this big bright green planet, or moon I should say, it, it's just I think it's cool to look at. Um, Even if it may be unrealistic. I've seen on like the forums of people say, "Man, this doesn't make any sense. Why would any moon or planet be that color?" It's like, I don't care, guys. It looks neat. Well, it's just a video game. Not every single thing has to be scientifically accurate. Although one of Kerbal Space Program's biggest strengths is that all the physics and everything is pretty dang accurate. As far as I can tell, it's super realistic, especially for a game. So anyway, so now we are coming back to Yoda Station. Obviously, the whole thing is for naught if we can't actually return to the station where the science lab is and, you know, refuel the ship and process the experiments and transmit it back home and get ready to do another mission. That's the whole point of this, is that we need to be able to land and get back to the station and have this whole thing be reusable, you know. But frankly, the runabout was very well designed, if I do say so myself. Speaking as the engineer and also the pilot, the RCS tanks, or the RCS thrusters, were perfectly balanced right at the center of mass, which actually, looking at it now, doesn't seem to make sense. Really? Because they're pretty far down. Well, I guess that gas tank on the bottom is very wide and would be the heaviest component on the whole thing. So maybe that is where the center of mass is. At any rate, when you put your RCS thrusters at the center of mass, it makes docking maneuvers much easier, because you can slide, like I'm doing here. I'm sliding left. If you don't balance the thrusters, then when you try to slide, you're also going to rotate, and you're going to spin and wobble, and you're not going to be lined up correctly anymore. So if you get those lined up right, you can slide up and down, left and right, and stay pointed in the right directions. It makes things a lot easier. So docking this back to the space station was a whole lot easier than the mission in the last video where I delivered the living quarters. This was much simpler. So here we go, coming in to dock with the station. And you can see I've got other ports here. I could add on to this space station. I could add more to the station if I wanted to. Well, I've considered possibly bringing up another component that's just a larger gas tank. But anyway, there we go. We have made a solid connection with the station. We are now connected. And now we can see the science lab in action. See the little icon for the little beaker with the little bubbles up in the liquid or whatever? That is the button you push to actually scientifically process your experiments in the computer lab. Which just means, so when you do science in this version of Kerbal Space Program, because if you guys are watching this video a year from now, I mean, they're making so many updates to the game that everything could be totally different in the future. But as of right now, if you do a science experiment and then just transmit it, just radio it back to Kerbin, you get the least amount of science. If you do an experiment and then you process it in the science lab and then radio it, then transmit it back to Planet Kerbin, you get kind of a medium amount of science. More than if you transmit it without processing. And if you bring it back to Planet Kerbin and safely land on the planet and recover the vehicle, then you get 100% of all the science. So the processing them here in the science lab is just a way to maximize the scientific yield of the effort we went to, without going to the trouble of flying back home again. And incidentally, you'll notice nothing docked with the station right now is really capable of flying back to Planet Kerbin and landing. There are no parachutes on the runabout. So there's 3 people on board the station. You don't see their icons, but there are 2 Kerbals inside the science lab, who are presumably the scientists who are doing all of the science. And then there's good old generic Kerman, who divides his time between living in the cupola and being the commander of the station and making sure that it doesn't run into asteroids, and clearly also being the guy in the runabout flying down to Minmus and stuff. So he does everything except what the science nerds in the computer lab does, I guess. Those guys, they just stay in the computer lab. They're like, we love science. Why would we ever leave the lab? We have windows and computers. That's all we need. So anyway, so there we go. So now he's going to return. Now let's see. Yeah, he's going to go back into the station. And I think we already did the refueling. I didn't put a whole bunch of that in the video, I guess. But the refueling was a little bit eye-opening for me, because I hadn't realized how few times I can refuel that runabout with just the gas tank. So the long gas tank, the long fuel tank that the solar panels are attached to, actually holds the same amount of fuel as the flatter but wider fuel tank on the runabout. So if we used half of our, and here we go, we just hadn't gotten to it yet in the video. Here I'm transferring fuel from the space station into the runabout to refuel the runabout and get it ready to go again. And yeah, I'm only going to be able to refuel that runabout like twice. Just only one more time after this. So if I really want to use it enough to gather all the science on Minmus, I'm going to have to bring a fuel, I'm going to have to bring a gas tanker, a fuel tanker out here to resupply the station. So I could either just refill that fuel tank on the resource arm that has the batteries and the fuel tank and everything, or I could permanently connect another component that is just another giant gas tank. And either option works. I don't know. I haven't decided what I'm going to do. Adding another component that is a large gas tank is appealing to me, though. You know, just because then the station gets a little bit larger and a little bit more awesome looking. Just kind of cooler. There's also the idea, there's 3 Kerbals living here right now. It makes more sense to me to add a 4th Kerbal so that one guy can be in the cupola even while another person takes the runabout down to the planet and the 2 scientists can stay in the science lab doing science. So I don't know, maybe I need to add on to this. And it wouldn't hurt to just fly a spaceship out here in dock that is designed to fly back home again and do a crew rotation. Just from a roleplay standpoint, it would be fun if some of these guys got to go home and were replaced with fresh personnel. But anyway, so there we go. Yoda Station has served a purpose. We flew down to the surface, gathered science, came back up, processed it in the science lab, transmitted it back home for maximum science over the radio, refueled and reset everything on the runabout, and now we're ready to rinse and repeat. Thanks for watching, everybody!